My name is Odin. I'm with Dig In. It's my own firm working nationally around collaboration and leadership development and strategy. And I wanted to say how excited I am to be with all of you, to be working with Sage and with Ashley and the team at SPARCC. And just wanted to share a few things. One thing that I wanted to start with is another way of getting a little bit of a read of kind of where folks are. So we have a little poll that we're going to start off with here. If folks could just share, you can see, I find virtual facilitation a hoot, a bore, a panic attack. I'd rather lose my Zoom subscription. If I could facilitate every meeting, I would. I don't even know as a facilitator, if I could facilitate every meeting, I would, but it's a nice option. Okay, there's only one. I want to meet the brave soul who wrote that. If I could facilitate every meeting, I would. Probably Sage. Great.
It wasn't me, but whoever that person is, they're my kin.
Yeah, yeah. I know. I was like, every now and again, it's nice to be facilitated, even as a facilitator. Okay, so it looks like there are, people are, there's some excitement in there. About a third of us are excited about it. Virtual facilitation, some people are like, yeah, whatever, like I want to do the work. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about today and over the next 4 sessions is this, in our current circumstance, and whenever we're facilitating, it enables us to do the work. And then, of course, there are a lot of you, not surprising, because public speaking and facilitation is in some way a form of public speaking or public presencing. I'm sure folks know this statistic. It regularly ranks above fear of death for people. So not surprising that there are about a third, a little more than a third of us who feel like virtual facilitation is a panic attack. There's a lot more going on. So thanks for sharing sort of where you are there. So I'll just, here we go. We'll take this off of there. And I just want to go over kind of where we're going and what we're up to. And what you see now on your screen are the 4 main themes that we'll be covering not only today, but throughout our time together. So the first is change, and that is something that probably makes people quite nervous about co-facilitation or facilitation, especially virtually. I have a colleague who says it's not knowing what to do, it's knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. So we're going to be talking today about the big picture of emergent strategy in our broader context, but even on a moment-to-moment level, we're faced with change all the time. We also want to ground our work in culture, in talking about racial equity, racial justice, and what's called trauma-informed design. So understanding that people are all coming to meetings, whether they are face-to-face or virtual, from a variety of backgrounds, from experiences, and that both individually and culturally, people are holding what makes them themselves. And we want to design for that as best as we can. We also want to talk about creativity. Ashley already mentioned this in the work that she was doing, just getting us grounded and having us arrive. So a lot of what we're going to be doing is sharing different tools and techniques with you, but we're also going to be modeling different facilitation styles. The way Sage shows up is different from the way Ashley shows up, is different from the way I show up, is different from the way you will show up as a facilitator. And all is welcome. There's no one set behavior or presence that you need to have. And then most importantly, caring for ourselves, for our families, and chosen and biological or given, for our workplaces, for our broader community, and for the world. And we really want to come to facilitation, as Adrienne Marie Brown shares, and you'll learn more about her later, as an act which demonstrates a grand love for life, our own and that of others. And today we're really going to be talking about the basics around all of this. And yeah, we can go to the next slide, Ashley. And in order to do that, each time we want to have some guidelines for our interactions together, whether those are face-to-face or face-to-face in this way, virtually. So I want to encourage people to be aware of how much you're talking or not talking. The acronym we sometimes like to use is WAIT, which is why am I talking? Being present, so encouraging you to be here like Ashley did. We started with music today with some grounding, a quote or a poem, sharing some norms and ground rules as I'm doing now, just bringing people in. Being creative, welcoming new ideas, using new tools and techniques. We're going to be doing that and encouraging you to do that. And again, to be caring, taking care of yourselves and others. And we have ways in which, as facilitators, we'll support you in that today and moving forward, and tools that we have to share as well. So before I transition and hand it off to Sage, I just wanted to have folks do one more little chat poll. And the question that I have for you, I have two questions. The first is, how are you observing people showing up to meetings? So many of us are in, we're all in this virtual context. How are you observing people showing up to meetings? You can just enter that in the chat. And it could just be a one word, yeah, tired. Yep. Stretched thin, distracted, preoccupied, over zoomed. Yeah, we're zooming. Yeah, multitasking. Yeah. So I think that, and there's more folks who are entering this. So as a, Ashley, +1, we're multitasking right now. So I would encourage you, if you are multitasking, to not do that, because many studies, if you're also tired, demonstrate that multitasking tires you out even more and is really challenging for your brain and stressful. So to the extent that you are able to, and I know often it feels like webinars and trainings like this, because of the culture we developed, feel optional, and I can do something else while I'm listening in. And I would really encourage you to just be here as a practice for yourself and as a facilitator or someone who's going to be in these meetings, feeling what it feels like to be present. And I also want to say being present, especially for those of us who are over zoomed, doesn't mean that we're staring into the screen the whole time. So I want to share a little self-care practice, which is 20-20-20 practice. 2020 has really become like a bad number given how this year is going. But 20-20-20 is really helpful, which is that every 20 minutes, you should take at least 20 seconds and look at something 20 feet away to be kind to your eyes. So you don't even have to, I'm now not looking at the screen, but I'm very present with all of you. And hopefully you can feel that. I'm looking out my window at the trees, but I'm still here. And if you think about it, even if you're in a face-to-face meeting, you're not like staring without a break at the person who is speaking. You're looking around the room, you're looking out the window. So I encourage you to do that as well. And then the final question before I hand it off to Sage is, what's your biggest challenge in facilitating virtual meetings, especially for those of you who find it to be a panic attack or a bore? What's the challenge that you're facing? In a word or a phrase, you can enter that into the chat. Yeah, connecting with people I don't know. How do you do that? I don't know. I know a few of you right now. Yeah, how to make it engaging. God, especially with how much we're on Zoom. Yep. Okay. How do you move the work? Yeah, there's a lot of, especially virtually, there's a lot of second guessing ourselves. It's like, is this moving things forward, or am I just here in outer space talking and nobody's really getting this or responding? Yeah, not being able to read the room. Yeah, and you can, I mean, I can't see folks who are not on the video screen, but you can train yourself to sort of get a sense of like, oh, here's where this person's energy is. It's really hard to do, but over time you can. Yeah, making it valuable, meaningful. Thank you, everyone. So you can keep entering anything in the chat. If there are questions that come up or comments you'd like to make on something that we're saying or sharing, and we're going to have plenty of opportunity to interact with each other as well and ask questions and be involved in dialogue. So I'm going to hand it off to Sage for our next piece.
Welcome, everyone. So nice to meet you all and be in community with you all. I think, as you just saw, we are demonstrating what it means to be in our homes and in our private spaces, and invite everyone in, and just wishing my partner a happy day as they go about their business. So I really appreciate the framing. My name is Sage Crump. I work with the Emergent Strategy Ideation Institute, and appreciate you all sharing the types of things that are challenging around virtual facilitation. Ashley, Odin, and I are going to model so many different ways that facilitation can happen. And in the planning of this, we wanted to be explicit about, we would never throw all of these into a session with folks, right? Like when we're doing it with the same group. But because we're trying to model different things for you to be able to use, you're going to see a lot of different practices over the next 4 sessions, right? So my particular style of facilitation, I call it a creative practice. I'm a creative facilitator, which means basically I like to gamify. I think about kinesthetic learning. How do we think about how we share and learn with each other in ways, whether or not we're in person or online? How are we engaging ourselves in multiple ways? And the first way I want to demonstrate is a tool called Mural. So I'm going to drop, Ashley just dropped Mural into the chat. And we're going to use Mural to help us ground in what is facilitation? What are we talking about when we say facilitation? If you ask folks to define facilitation, you'll get many different responses. And so we wanted to take a moment for you to ground for yourself what your facilitation practice is about. So I'm going to share my screen and do a quick tutorial just so you know how to work it, and then we'll get into its content. So this is Mural. It's a tool that allows folks to collectively in real time engage content, give feedback, reply to different things. I think there are a few folks who may have experiences with it already as I'm watching. So let me give you a couple of tips if you're new. First, if you will go hover over your name or whatever you are, koala, all kinds of things, and click on that, you'll get a series and hit hide cursor. So as you see, it's a little distracting. I've got all these cursors moving around. If I hit hide cursor, everyone disappears but my own cursor. Their content will show up, but their cursor is gone. That's the first thing I want to show you. The second thing I want to show you is how do I move around the board? We all have different eyes. I appreciate Odin giving a sense of what our eyes need. And so we have a plus or minus. We know what zoom, that's a zoom in or out. So as you need in your link, you can zoom in or out so that you can read what's happening inside the different boxes, inside the different content. And then lastly is our friend, the hand. The hand with this one, it's move mode. So when it turns, background turns black, you use your cursor, you click, and you can move the board around. Mm-hmm. So in order for us to get into our first section, I'm going to make it a little larger. Right. And I'm going to move a little to the left so you can see where we are. So this is this is the section we're working in. Who remembers Mad Libs? I love Mad Libs. I had a great time. It was instrumental in my childhood. It's how I learned story making, how I learned to make meaning of things. I still love them to this day. I think they're a great way to, for people to begin to think about how to build story and collect information. So we've got a couple of Mad Libs. And we're going to take a few minutes to individually fill these out. How you do that is if you go to one of the circles and you double click, wait, get out of, you have to get out of move mode and you click. Then you see I have a blinking cursor and I can type into it. Oh, some of you all are already in it. Okay. I love that. And you can type here. And don't worry if you're new, I'm going to go ahead and we'll clean things up as we go along. All right, let's ungroup some things. I see folks. Great. So let's get a couple minutes. We have a couple of questions. First is, facilitation is the blank of blank in order to blank. Right? Facilitation is the blank of blank in order to blank. Strong facilitation involves blank in order to blank. And it is important to consider blank when facilitating. Take us through them one by one. And I want you to unmute yourself to share what you've seen that's surprising to you. They're like, oh, this is the kind of facilitation I want to do. This is what I think is important about facilitation. So the first is, facilitation is the blank of the blank in order to blank. And anyone can unmute themselves.
Interesting to see barrier for the first Mad Lib hole.
Facilitation is the barrier of, so for whomever put barrier up, can you share with us a little bit about what you meant by that? We know it is written by somebody in this crew.
Yeah, this is Catherine. I actually wrote that.
Can you explain your Mad Lib, Catherine?
Yeah, I mean, facilitation to me, like poor facilitation or not bringing really strong, creative, engaging facilitation skills is a barrier to having a productive meeting. Successful outcomes. So maybe I interpreted it differently, but.
What is your whole sentence, Catherine? Facilitation is the blank of the blank in order to blank.
Facilitation is the barrier of my position to support my team.
So basically you're thinking,
I am here, right? Like I'm really trying to like get over that hurdle. I want to hone and up my facilitation skills.
I'm going to stop sharing because you all can see this. And I would love to see your faces. Thank you, Catherine. So facilitation can be a barrier for folks. It can make people feel uncomfortable. They're not really sure what they're doing in front of folks. How do you actually support a team? You know, one of the things we talk about as we were prepping for this is, facilitation is about moving a folks through a process, right? Like it isn't just being in front of a room in a meeting. We are in facilitation all the time. And it's a skill set that we've used with our families. It's a skill set that we're growing. And so really thinking about how to facilitate, how to support ease, facile, how to support ease for others. Is there another one that folks either curious about, resonant? And I appreciate the curiosity of like, where did that show up?
Hi, this is Nick. I'd love to hear about who wrote hot in the first one. Like, what's that sentence?
Yes. I need to meet my other kin person. Who else feels like facilitation is hot? Yeah. Facilitators.
The facilitation team.
We do. We do.
But I didn't write that.
Ah.
Sorry, that was me. This is Sadia Woods. I was just being fun. It's a Mad Lib, but I also think facilitation is pretty dope. I like facilitators because I think that they're just great at really being able to get people to open up and move a process on. Whereas, if you just left the group to its own devices, folks might just kind of sit there. So I see facilitators and facilitation as this kind of, neat trick.
Sadia, what was your full sentence? Sadia, can you tell us your full sentence? I think we lost Sadia. Well, in our next few minutes, let's move to the next one. Strong facilitation involves holding a neutral stance. Emotional intelligence. Making this larger for myself. There we go. Joy. Yes. Connection. Enabling engagement. In order to shape meaning for the group, enable collaboration, connect and understand, connect with your audience, host a great event, make change and change the world. I'm glad change the world is there, because it absolutely is. Facilitation is strong facilitation is necessary to change the world. I think there are a couple of things that may surprise folks as we go through these 4 sessions, because there are certain ways in which we'll get into a little more that facilitation can be framed through the lens of dominant culture, white Western dominant culture. And we want to break some of that apart, right? We want to be in relationship with the folks that we are facilitating with. So there's a way in which we want to position the facilitator and strong facilitation as support for a group, right? Like I love that has strong facilitation helps folks adapt. Like how are we moving through? How are we grounding? How are we building vulnerability and openness? I think more and more as we're talking about the times we're living in and mirroring for folks to be able to show up as their fullest selves while we're facilitating, it makes space for facilitators to model that for the group. So if you are holding things tight and holding things rigid and going, share with yourself, relax, but you're like, oh my God, I have 10 minutes left. Then there actually will provide sort of a distance for your folks. So you really want to embody that which you are asking of the folks. I always like to think about, I never ask anything of a room that I'm facilitating that I'm not willing to do myself, right?
Beautiful. Sage, can I mention something as well, or do you want to, in the time that we have, maybe hear from a couple other people?
Go right ahead.
So I wanted to just build on what Sage was sharing, because I think that there is a common, I won't call it a misconception, but a common conception that facilitators are neutral. And that might be the case in certain instances, but I think based on what Sage is saying, I like to go with the platinum rule, which is not do unto others as you would have done unto you, but do unto others as they need and want done. And that is a very, very important framing for facilitation. So as a facilitator, I'm not a neutral person. So I never consider myself a neutral facilitator. And I think that also is a lot about white Western dominant culture, is like just stand there and run the meeting and just like help us make the decision. And that's a big part of your role. But also sometimes the group needs you to be provocative. Sometimes the group needs you to be not neutral. So what I would say is that if there's a basis of trust there, and if there's a relationship that's established, neutrality is not as important. And it might be that you need to be neutral, but everybody in that meeting should be able to trust you as a facilitator and understand where you are coming from. And so making that clear is really important.
Thank you, Odin. I think that goes back to some of the community agreements. There's sometimes I walk into rooms and I'm like, here are the non-negotiables in this room. These things are like not, they are what they are. We're not going to debate them. It's not who comes is. Like there's sometimes you're setting a container for folks to understand how they're coming into it. And so speaking of a container, I'm going to share my screen and get into just quickly the next section that we want to share with you, because I come from, part of my facilitation practice comes from a school called Emergent Strategy. And the Emergent Strategy Ideation Institute is a body that supports movements getting in right relationship with change. So what I'm about to share with you is how to think about, as facilitators, how we support change happening. And here we have some principles and some elements that help us do that. And Ashley, are you sharing or am I?
I can. I'm ready to do that.
While we add to the screen, I just really appreciated that, Odin and Sage, because one of the things we've talked about is being a person of color and wanting to show up as your full self doesn't mean neutral. It means ideally multicultural and embodying yourself, but in the space and creating that for others.
Yeah. You absolutely, I think, again, that's a really important point, because we know that objectivity, this idea of objectivity is a part of how white supremacy functions. It just is. You know, we are beings, we have experiences, and we want to actually pull all of that into the room, including ours as facilitators. All of that experience, because our collective experience is where we find more and more brilliance. And Emergent Strategy helps us do that. I think some folks may have seen the book or familiar with the book Emergent Strategy, written by Adrienne Marie Brown. And it's based upon this idea of, actually, if you want to move to the next slide, this idea of emergence, that that complex systems and patterns arise out of a multiplicity of relatively simple interactions. So what it invites us to do is think about the interactions that we're having as a way to think about how we're transforming the world. That there's a relationship between what happens in a facilitation room and how the people in the room are able to envision the ways in which they can transform the world. And so one of the things that the book outlines is a set of principles that I'm going to start with the principles. There are elements we'll get to at a later session. But for facilitators, the principles come in really handy. Ashley, if you'll switch to the next. So here are some of the principles. Small is all, small is good. If you trust the people, they become trustworthy. Change is constant. Be like water. Move at the speed of trust. Connection is more important than mass. There is always enough time for the right work. There's a conversation that only the people in this room can have. Find it. Less prep, more presence. And what you pay attention to grows. There is never a failure, always a lesson. And so as facilitators, these principles can be really helpful in how we think about, one, how we shape the engagements that we're asking people to do. It helps us think about pace and timing of facilitation. When is it necessary to spend a little more time in a space? When is it important to make sure that we are grounding? When I think all of us have had this experience, right? Where, you know, oh no, we're short of time. And the first thing that gets cut is introductions, grounding, all the things that actually connect us to each other as humans, right? Like, and so how do we push against that and create new models that actually say that is more important? Because if we're going to be in the struggle for change, if we're going to be in the transformation of the world we live in for the long haul, that how we are being together is as important as what we produce out of meetings. And in some cases, and in many cases, more important, because you want to be able to continue to work together and continue to come back together. So those are the principles we have for emergent strategy. I would love for you to take a moment as we transition and move into a stretch break of just typing into the chat those that resonate with you, if any of the principles resonate with you, if you have questions, and we can engage those as we move forward, how to do which one and how they function. Does that make sense, folks? And I'll demonstrate. For me, it took me a long time as a facilitator to wrap myself around less prep, more presence. And I came to that specifically as what I ask of people. As someone who feels like I need to have things to some extent shaped for someone, I wanted to make sure that other folks didn't come into the meetings that I'm facilitating already feeling defeated, already feeling like, oh, I didn't read everything, already feeling like that they didn't have what was necessary to offer. So that's one of the things that I've learned to really lean into as a facilitator and learn to be transformed by the service of the work by using these principles. And I've done a lot of talking really quickly, but I wanted to make sure we stayed as close to time. So we're now at a stretch break. Sparks, it's on.
Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing. Awesome. So I'm just going to invite you again. We're about 45 minutes in, especially for a 90-minute workshop. Taking times to just do a quick break is actually really helpful. So I'm just going to invite you again to find your feet. And this time I want you to just like energize your toes and like just really notice like if you wiggle them a little faster. And also finding the balls of your feet moving in and out, and your ankles, and just like move them around. Get the blood flow going like way down at the base of the body. And also get your fingers. I had a voice teacher once that talked about having like little sparkly fingers, and just like allowing those to get energized and shake them out. And if you want to add like a little shoulder shimmy, sometimes that also just feels good to like get the blood flowing and moving. And so just shake what needs to shake, because we sit at these desks for long amounts of time. And channeling Odin's 20-20-20, if you can also just like look 20 feet away as you are shaking whatever needs to get your blood flowing. You can also, if you have a pet at your house, you can channel their stretching. So if you notice your cats or your dogs, like whatever, or your guinea pigs, however they move their bodies, just take a moment to like channel an animal and like allow that to live with you. Cool. So we're about to move into a section. If you want to turn your video back on, of course guinea pigs stretch, like it's just maybe all in the tail. I don't know how they work. So we're gonna move into a section around like, who are you and what do you understand about the people in the room? And so bringing in this thing of like who we are as individuals, culturally, like all of the complexities of our identities informs how we show up as facilitators and has an impact on the participants who are in the room with us. And so we're actually going to do a little round robin between the three of us, where you're going to hear Sage, Odin, and I each answer the same question. And that question is, we're each going to take 90 seconds. I will be a timekeeper. And so the question is, how do your various cultural identities inform your facilitation? And so this is a question you all are then going to be answering in breakout groups. So just to note that you will also be on the spot in small groups to be exploring this same question as well as a couple others. So we're going to go, Sage is going to go first, and then Odin, and then me. And just naming like this technique again is a way of like hearing quick snapshots of a couple different voices focused on a question in order to queue up for a deeper conversation for the group. And so rather than doing a panel where the three of us have a long conversation, we're really just asking, we're really just giving these like short bits of time for each of us to explore something, to queue up for the group. All right, Sage, are you ready?
Okay.
I'm gonna go for it.
Great. So, hi folks. I am a queer Black femme living in this world in which we call 2020. And over the course of my lifetime, there are a couple of things that have become really important to me. As a Black woman and as a facilitator, I had to work through initially this sense of my own sense of perfectionism. Like, I will not be considered an authority. I will not be what I say in different rooms won't be heard unless I show up as a presentation of what dominant culture expects of me as a facilitator, right? Like, I show up in pantsuits, awards, the whole kind of get up of like what it means to present as an authority. And over the course of my facilitation practice over the last 20 years, I've been able to unpack that more and more to understand that part of what's really important for me to show up as a facilitator is about how I think and how I learn, right? So that's why I do a lot of gaming, because that's interesting and exciting to me. That's why I do art activities, because I'm a kinesthetic learner. I'm thinking about the various ways that my facilitation practice actually pushes against that which I was taught as a facilitator, which is you are the expert in the room. They need you. They'd be lost without you. You have to keep things, strict and together, when we know the world doesn't work that way. So I was really, my intentional practice can be connected to, I hear the tinging, can really be connected to like the work of Tema Okun and white supremacist organizational culture, and really thinking about how to subvert those things. 90 seconds is fast.
I know. Odin.
Yeah. So, I grew up in an affluent New York suburb and am a white, straight male. And even from a young age, with all of that conditioning, which I'm still learning from, working through, I felt like I never felt like a connect with the culture. I was always sort of a little out of the stream of things. I could see like patterns and how people were interacting. And it drew me eventually to social change work and environmental justice work, which is a lot of where kind of the content that I bring is steeped. And I just realized, like, I want to help people talk to each other more effectively. And part of that is just me. And part of it is, growing up in the Jewish culture and sort of wanting everybody, and this is common with many cultures, is like, are you having a good time? Like it's some people call facilitation the art of hosting, and, wanting to bring everybody in and have everybody seen. And, really kind of honor those things that come out of my Jewishness, which is not a big religious part of me, but a big cultural part of me of, the like education and family and connection and community and social justice. So I'm tingling there. So I'll leave it. Thank you.
Okay. So I grew up in a very small rural community in Virginia. It was a farming community. And working class, predominantly like 93, 95% white, very working class. And so most of my life, though, I've lived in big cities. So I perpetually feel like the country mouse in the city. And that piece of me of being Southern and like hospitality is so important. So as a facilitator, that's one of the things that I really like anchor into is like, as Odin said, the art of hosting, of like, how are we creating a space where folks can really show up and be together? I'm also a theater director, which means I like being in charge. And I like making shows and events and experiences where people can really experience something emotionally transformative and hopefully change the world, which then connects to like my queerness and my anti-racism work of like really wanting to disrupt white dominant culture and create new ways of being together that are also founded in like other ways of being that are not oppressive. So those are the pieces that I really hold, and that I want, in many ways, being in facilitation rooms is like rehearsing the world we're trying to make, and can we do it in this space together? So there's a quick like anti-panel, like quick way of doing, like hearing 3 different people give some insights. So we're gonna, Sage, where are we going next?
Yeah. So we're going to break into some small groups. So surprise, if you thought you were going to come here and just learn how to take care of other people, that's not how we're shaping facilitation. First, facilitation is about how do you understand yourself as someone who's going to be standing in front of the room? How do you understand your positionality? How do you understand power? What is your own analysis? Like in order to be a facilitator, you have to be self-aware. I mean, I think that's strong facilitation requires people who are self-aware. And so we're going to take some time to ask you a few questions for you to have a small group conversation. And the questions are getting dropped into the chat, but we're going to ask you to go into a small group and talk with just 2 other people about how does race, racism, and racialized capitalism show up in you? And what do you have to be careful of in facilitation? And we're saying careful as in full of care. How are you being really thoughtful, intentional about the way these things live in your body, and what does it mean when you are supporting a group through a process? What are your unique challenges of facilitating a multiracial space virtually? Because that's where most of us are facilitating these days. And then you'll report out into the chat when we come back. So you'll have roughly about, what do we have? 8 minutes? Let's help me somebody. To be in small group. Oh, we have 10. 8 to 10 minutes in small group.
Yeah, we're doing good.
So we're going to ask you to practice facilitation, right? Like while you're in the small group, to self-facilitate and ensure that you have, everyone has an opportunity to share their thoughts. And
Isla's going to kick us over.
Hey, let's get all these people. Hi, Elizabeth Wampler. So nice to see you. And nice to see all of you, but Elizabeth and I used to work together, so it's kind of at GCC. Well, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed those conversations, challenging though they may be. And if I could ask folks to also just mute if you're not sharing, we're going to ask you to unmute if you want to share in just a minute. But just wanted to have a little bit of a discussion about what just surfaced in your groups. And sometimes we use the term report back, and I've been shying away from that term as a facilitator because of something that in the facilitation world we refer to as death by report back, which is just, we get people just reporting, you know, when we used to meet in person, it's like they read every bullet point on the flip chart. So we have a couple of ways that we can do that. And virtually, it's really nice because you can enter things in the chat, but what we really want to have you do, and you'll see this in the chat, Ashley's pasted the presentation that is linked at the very beginning of your participant agendas, which are our slides, not just for this session, but we will be adding and building to those, and you will be too, starting now. So if you go to that link, on slide 7, you will see something that looks like this. And it's just a space where you can show up, and then there were about 9 groups. So just to be sure that each group at least has sort of one of these spaces, and then you could share some other things. You could change the font size and create a little space and add something to a bubble that's maybe related to what somebody has put in there. Anonymous Mink is hard at work already, as is Anonymous Platypus. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing. The other thing that we can do in groups, especially of this size, and particularly virtually, is allow some people to add things there as other people are unmuting here and sharing what came up for them. So I also want to invite folks, and for me, apparently with certain, like basically your computer, if it has a certain capability, you can see up to 49 people on the screen. For whatever reason, I can only see 25 people per screen. So if you want to unmute, you can either just go ahead and do that, or we could do something really orderly, like you can use the raise hand function. So just share kind of what is it that we need to be careful of in the way that Sage framed it, as full of care. What do we need to be sensitive about, particularly given our own backgrounds and understanding of ourselves? What is it as facilitators that we need to be careful of? So it can go in the chat, it can go onto the slide, which many of you are doing, or you can unmute yourself or raise your hand. In addition to seeing your faces, I would love to hear your voices. So feel free to share a little something about yourself in the way that Sage and Ashley and myself did, or something that you want to be careful of, or just a reflection. I mean, these are big questions that we're asking to a large group in a relatively short period of time. I mean, I look at the question that we framed, and, you know, we could just talk our entire lives about that. How does race, racism, and racialized capitalism show up in you? And what do you have to be careful of in facilitation? And what are the unique challenges of facilitating multiracial spaces virtually?
Can I ask you guys a little bit about the spelling of careful versus, you know, careful, the regular, you know, the regular way, I would say?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the adaptations I'll be happy to share. Because oftentimes when you're being careful, it's like you're trying to be sensitive to others, right? Like we were talking a little bit about, sometimes you feel like your role as a facilitator can be about, again, making sure that it's okay for everyone. Don't upset anyone. Make sure it feels smooth. When actually we can lean into spaces of generative tension. That's how anything really grows. We want to back away from this idea of how to make the facilitation space feel good for everyone, and more, how are we thoughtful about our analysis of the room? How, as social justice folks, that we are thinking about, these are things that require care, that require thinking about. It's not necessarily the same as careful as in tiptoe, but it's full of care, that before I enter into a room, I'm thinking about power. I'm thinking about who's speaking first. I'm thinking about how, what are the types of sounds folks are going to engage in and through them. That's what we mean by full of care. Sort of when Ashley was talking about her Southern hospitality, which if you've never experienced it, is amazing. I'm like, how are we thinking about being full of care for folks, which is different to me than careful, which often implies in the way that we use it, sensitive or super gentle, and that doesn't have to be the case.
Yeah, great question.
And can I think building on that, I think especially in terms of like white supremacist culture, this like avoiding conflict and right to comfort, that part of what we're doing in creating a careful space is how are we intentionally thinking about like where we're going to disrupt that. And yeah.
Yeah.
And if we were in person, I would love to like feed you all biscuits and cookies, because that would be a thing I'd like to host.
And that's completely what I was thinking of when Sage mentioned your hospitality, Ashley. I was like, biscuits. You know, and I also think that in addition to that distinction around the word careful, a lot of facilitation is about being careful of the language we are using and the words that we are using. So to reclaim them and redefine them, even though, you know, Ella, to your question, like, oh, you know, is it just like a kind of a kind of a fun thing to spell careful that way. Well, no, it's not. It's very intentional. And, you know, the spell checker doesn't like it, but that's the intention that we have. And there are many other words like that as well. Other questions or reflections around where we want to be careful?
So this is Vicki Gatto. I had the privilege of being paired with Stephanie, so that was a treat. One of the things I was sharing in our pair share was that in this moment, as an African American woman, that I'm feeling hyper visible. And so with Zoom, where literally we're zoomed in on each other, then I'm way more mindful of the attribution, the effects of attribution, what's been projected onto me. And so when I'm passionate about something, and can it be perceived as being, I'm angry or confrontational? So I found that I pay a little bit more attention to it, and I'm a little bit more aware of it. And at the same time, in this moment, I'm exhausted just because of, everything that's going on. And so, right or wrong, I've started to care a little less. And I know that that's the opposite of what we're, but I've been owning my truth. And so one of the things, though, coming into meetings, I share my identities and talk about the fact that I really can't distinguish between the professional identity that I'm supposed to show up representing and my personhood. And so I don't apologize for it. I think I disclose it.
Thank you, Vicki. That's so beautiful. And I think there's something about this time that is, so many layers of what folks are going through is about that. And I love we might need to use the care less also, because it's about allowing yourself to be yourself. We were talking about that as you were in breakout groups and how important that is. So thank you for lifting that up. And there's often a tricky time where there's a vulnerability in a virtual way, just like there might be in person, but it's even more so because you don't know exactly how you're coming across. So thanks for lifting that up.
Hey, Odin.
Yeah,
Sage.
Add something about that, Vicki, because I appreciate that. Because in June, a lot of facilitators, you'd be in space and folks were asking in mixed race spaces and Black spaces, like, how are you doing? And it was like, we don't want to, most of the Black women, we don't want to talk about how we're doing right now, right? So a group of Black women facilitators started an open document that was like, here are a bunch of questions you can ask as check-in questions that are not just, how are you doing, right? That are other questions, because whether it's in the moment of uprising or it's in the moment of COVID, our kind of typical, tell me how you're feeling is such a large question right now, right? That we need other things to be asking. And that's, I think, a perfect example of both understanding who is in the room, who you are facilitating, what might be going on in the world, and how that might be impacting the people that you're talking to, right? It feels caring, right? Oh, how are you? I want to know how you're doing. And it's well, the recognition of giving folks space to not answer that, right? To answer something else.
Yeah. People are clamoring for that list, Sage. Is that available?
I'm going to go grab it. It's open source. So I'll go grab it and drop it in the chat.
Yeah, there was this immediate, I felt it just not even before the chat started. It was this hunger for yes, please. A couple of other comments, and then we're gonna close and just respect everyone's time and stop at the top of the hour. Although you're also welcome, if folks want to just stay sort of informally afterwards to chat virtual kind of cafe style, you're welcome to do that as well, and we'll stay on for a little bit. Other comments?
I think to Sage's point, I've been receiving the questions, but I've been answering them honestly. And I think the other piece, which I shared with Vicki, was just that in a regular setting, the echo chamber that could be afforded, where you could kind of prep before, doesn't necessarily happen in the same way with the Zoom. And so just kind of owning the words that are being used and shared as my own, and kind of giving myself full permission to kind of share where I am in my heart space and how I'm feeling with certain pieces, and doing the follow-ups. And I think that level of accountability has actually led to some solid action items during this time that I'm not sure I would have gotten in a different season.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Anyone else want to share something just before we transition, and then I'm going to hand it over to Ashley. All right, so Ashley mentioned this, but please keep filling out the slide deck. We're going to do a little bit of homework there, both in terms of your experience and also in terms of facilitation scenarios, situations, challenges that you have confronted or are confronting now in this virtual way that we can walk through in our future sessions with you.
Cool. Thank you all so much for being with us today. In the agenda that Ella sent out, there are a couple resources that are short handouts. One is digital meeting best practices. They're kind of like 4 bullets. It's I think a 1 or 2 pager PDF, just as you are in the midst of Zoomland. And then there's a second one on how using Zooms how to use Zoom to make meetings more transformative. So those will be there, and then we'll also add in Sage's awesome list that has been surfaced. Homework for next week. So we're meeting next Tuesday, and we're going to talk about the prep for meetings. So what do you need to do to get ready? And for that, we would love to see some scenarios that you've experienced, either challenges, facilitation challenges you've had or gone through. And so on slide 8 of the slide deck, just plug in like, here's a scenario that I'm grappling with related to facilitation. It could be something in the future. It could also be something that didn't go well in the past that you're like, how could I have done this differently? So send us scenarios. And then we're also going to invite you to bring an object that reflects your cultural superpower. So again, building on what are the things, so you all may get to see my cast iron skillet next week. As for me, that's an example of like my hospitality, and it's my grandmother's and kind of Southernness. And I bring all of that into facilitation. So bring an object that reflects your cultural superpower. Send us some scenarios. You can plug it into the slide deck. You can also just email Ella or us. And that's our homework. Any questions?
Okay.
Sage.
Yeah, I think I just want to affirm, like, as we move forward through these, that one of the things that we really hope we ground here in this first session is a recognition that facilitation is so much more than a set of practices. Right? Like, it is so much more than just a set of practices that you do. That part of what facilitation means is, what do you bring to the room? And how do you understand who you are in the world, how that shows up when you are in collective space? Then you have an opportunity to think about how that interacts with the collective body of people you are facilitating. But the relationship between clarity about who you are, what your analysis, how you think about the world, how you understand transformation, and being a strong facilitator is conjoined twins. Like, there's no separating the two. Right?
Yeah, and that being said, we know that there are so many demands on your time, and that a lot of people are zoomed out. So I wanted to express my appreciation for your taking the time to join us today, and encourage you to see this as part of a series. We'd love to have a fairly consistent group moving forward, because these do build on each other, and those themes that I went over earlier and that we've spoken to today get woven into how those practices show up. So it's not just a toolbox, it's actually the whole world around how you show up and use these tools. So it'd be great to see you next Tuesday at this same time, 12:30 Eastern.
Thanks, folks.
Feel free to stick around if folks have questions or you want to chat for a few minutes. Nope, there goes everyone.
Yeah. you.
We will see. Maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe she's Ella.
Yeah, I love that. I felt like one of those questions that keeps coming back up is, you know, what would it look like to be able to bring our full selves to our professional life? And then Stephanie's piece about, you know, how being authentic and raw, like sometimes be really building. But I was really struggling with, like, I don't want my colleagues and friends to do this labor for me to have to learn a lesson. But if they do that labor, then I really feel like we need to reflect and appreciate what they've shared. So.
Yeah.
How are we growing trust in those moments, right?